What felt quiet on the surface was actually the first sign that something had already shifted. Most people think the moment is over, but the real change has only just begun to move. Last night was not the ending of the full moon's effect. It was the start of something much deeper. A lot of people believe the most important part has already passed. They felt the intensity, saw the atmosphere change, and now that everything seems calm again, they assume nothing else is happening. That is the misunderstanding. This phase was never meant to be loud for long. The pink moon begins the movement, then the noise drops so the real process can unfold without being interrupted. That is why so many people miss it. They expect obvious signs. They expect something dramatic enough to prove that change is happening. But this energy does not work like that. It moves in silence. It keeps working when everything looks still. And because most people do not know how to read that stillness, they overlook what has already started. This was never just another full moon. It leaves something behind. It pushes people into a new space before they fully realize they have entered it. The pink moon is often connected with the first flowers of April, but that kind of growth is not soft. It is forceful. It breaks through ground that has been cold, packed and unmoving for months. That is exactly what this moment carries. Not slow progress, not a mild adjustment. Real motion in places that have stayed frozen for too long. Situations that gave you nothing begin to respond. Things that stayed silent begin to shift. And it does not happen little by little. It happens suddenly, in a way that changes the atmosphere all at once. That is the real effect of this phase. Most people will not notice it, not because it is weak, but because they are not paying attention to the right things. But once you know where to look, it becomes clear. At the moment, the strongest part of this phase is happening out of sight. You may not be able to fully see it yet, but it is already being arranged. 3 areas of your life are quietly being moved into a different position. Over the next few weeks, the results will begin to appear, not all in one burst, but in ways that feel far too exact to ignore. The first area is relationships. This is not about dramatic arrivals or big emotional endings. It is softer than that, but still very real. The wrong connections begin to loosen without effort. Some conversations naturally fade. Certain bonds stop holding the same weight, and at the same time, the right people begin to come closer without you having to force anything. It happens naturally. There is no big scene around it. The right people do not always enter with noise. Sometimes they simply stop feeling far away. The second shift is your direction. This is not one huge breakthrough where everything suddenly makes sense in an instant. It feels more like a steady pull that keeps getting stronger. One path begins to feel more real, more solid, and harder to ignore, while everything else starts losing its grip on you. It is not something you have to manufacture. It becomes obvious on its own. Real clarity does not beg for attention. It returns again and again until resisting it takes more energy than accepting it. The third area is opportunity and resources, not in the way people usually describe it. This is not about chasing after something completely new. It is about movement, returning to things that seemed blocked. Conversations that had gone nowhere begin moving again. Doors that looked closed start opening. Things that felt impossible a short while ago suddenly begin to seem reachable. And when that shift happens, you start to realize they were never fully denied to you. They were waiting for the right timing. That is the part most people miss. During this phase, pushing harder is not what helps. This is not a time that rewards force. It rewards alignment. What matters now is not trying to control everything. What matters is not interrupting what is already beginning to move. When the strongest part of the intensity fades, something very revealing begins to happen, and most people do not even notice it. Once there is no pressure, no excitement, and no emotional rush pushing you forward, you naturally return to your default way of being. Not because you chose it, but because that is where you go when nothing is demanding more from you. That version of you matters more than most people realize. This phase makes it visible. It shows you how you think when nothing urgent is happening, how you move when there is no deadline, what your mind focuses on when no outside pressure is telling you what to do. That is your baseline. And everything that comes next is shaped by that baseline, whether you realize it or not. Your future is not only built in your strongest moments, it is built in what you return to after the momentum is gone. That is where the deeper truth lives. Without the rush, you get to see who you really are. And that version of you is either quietly creating something new or quietly repeating what has already been. There is another part of this moon that many people overlook completely. And it is not balance in the simple way people usually talk about it. Libra does not only keep things even, it notices where things have been unequal for too long. Every time you gave more than you should have, explained more than necessary, or stayed longer than you were meant to, that imbalance was there. Not in a dramatic way, not in an emotional way, just honestly. This moon did not come to create a scene. It came to settle what had already gone too far. That is why things may feel different now. Not louder, not heavier, just finished. Something that used to pull on you no longer feels the same. Something that once had power over you suddenly does not. You are not in the process of letting go. In many ways, you already have. The moment you stop negotiating with something, it begins to lose its hold on you. That is what real enough feels like. It is not dramatic. It does not need an argument or some huge confrontation. It simply removes your desire to keep carrying what has been draining you. And that is where the real change begins. Most people think progress means adding something new. But sometimes the deeper shift comes from what you no longer allow. You start becoming different the moment you stop making space for what keeps taking from you. Something is truly done when it stops costing your energy. And once that happens, it never returns in exactly the same way. There is also a very specific inner moment happening during this phase. If you pay attention, you can feel it clearly. It is that honest thing you almost said and then held back. It is the message you typed, stared at, and erased. It is the conversation you kept imagining but never allowed yourself to actually have. It is that truth that rose so clearly inside you that you had to distract yourself just to avoid dealing with it. None of that happened by accident. This moon did not only change the energy around you, it brought you face to face with something you have been avoiding for a long time. Part of you has wanted to keep things under control, avoid disruption, and maintain peace. But another part of you has felt the pressure building. You have known something was off. You have felt it even while trying to stay composed. For a while, you have been living between those two positions. Saying just enough, but not saying the whole truth. Seeing what the issue is, but not acting on it. Knowing deep down, but not fully admitting it. This phase cuts through that space. After truth has been delayed long enough, it stops feeling optional. That is why it feels sharper now. It no longer comes back as a vague feeling. It returns as direct knowing. It is no longer confusion. It is clarity. You know what is wrong. You know what needs to be said. You know what needs to change. You know what you have been allowing for too long. And that kind of clarity is uncomfortable because it takes away your ability to pretend you still do not understand. You are not lost, you are nervous. And for many people, that is the hardest part. Not discovering the truth, but admitting that it has already become clear. At this stage, many people try to step back again. They try to soften what they know, delay it one more time, or convince themselves the timing is still not right. But something inside has already moved. Once that inner shift happens, the old way of avoiding it does not work the same anymore. You do not need more permission. You do not need another sign. You only need to catch up with what has already become real inside you. And once that happens, whether you speak it aloud or not, everything begins changing immediately. Not in a chaotic way, not through some dramatic explosion, but through a clean, precise, lasting shift that changes the course of what comes next. You begin to walk away from what no longer belongs in your life. Not because you are cold, and not because you are giving up, but because some things stop matching who you have become. What once felt important starts to feel unnecessary. What once kept you stuck stops having the same hold. And the moment you stop trying to convince yourself otherwise, everything starts looking different. The shift can seem intense, but it is not chaos. It is honesty. It is the moment you stop forcing yourself to stay connected to what already feels finished. After that, something quiet starts to reveal itself. You begin to notice what remains. Not everything makes it through this kind of turning point. Some things fade on their own. Some lose meaning without warning. Some simply fall away because they were never meant to continue. But what stays has a different quality to it. It does not survive by accident. It stays because there is something real in it. And once the pressure settles, what stays behind starts moving in a new way. It does not feel forced. It does not feel like something you have to drag forward. It begins to move with ease. That is how you know the weight has changed. What is meant to grow no longer needs struggle to prove itself. It starts opening naturally. You may notice it in small, almost unremarkable ways. Something you once overlooked begins to matter. A connection that seemed ordinary starts to feel dependable. A direction you never seriously considered begins to show real potential. And the strange part is, you are not trying so hard anymore. You are not chasing. You are not pushing. Things begin unfolding because there is finally space for them to unfold. Once the resistance is removed, what belongs can breathe. And that is why this stage matters so much. What was draining you, confusing you, or demanding constant effort is starting to fall away. What remains no longer has to fight just to exist. It moves because it is ready. There is also something final about this phase that people often fail to understand. A full moon is not just a symbol. It marks a climax. It shows you what has reached its highest point. That means whatever has been building, whether it was stress, attachment, confusion, or emotional pressure, has already peaked. It already hit the point of greatest intensity. Even if traces of it are still around, it is no longer growing. That matters more than most people realize. Because once something reaches its top, it begins to weaken. It may not disappear all at once, but it does begin to loosen. The hardest part has already passed. What remains is not an increase. It is a release. That is why things can start feeling different so quickly. What felt heavy a few days ago may suddenly feel neutral. What seemed urgent may no longer feel so commanding. Even the things that used to pull all of your attention can start to look strangely ordinary. And when that happens, people often think something is wrong. They think they lost their drive. They think they are disconnected. They think maybe what they felt before was not real. But that is not the truth. The truth is that the emotional charge has done its job. It showed you what needed to be seen. It enlarged everything so you could no longer ignore it. But now that the light has shifted, you are finally able to see what is actually there without all the exaggeration. This is where clarity becomes more valuable than intensity. When the emotional noise fades, reality becomes easier to recognize. You stop judging things by how strongly they make you feel in one moment. You start noticing what stays steady. And that is important, because strong feelings can be convincing. They can make temporary things feel permanent. They can make empty things seem meaningful. They can make the wrong path feel exciting enough to follow. But excitement is not always truth. What is true is what remains when the rush is gone. What is true is what still feels right when everything gets quiet. That is why this period can feel so different from what came before. You're no longer meeting life through the height of emotion. You are meeting it as it is. And in that plain, steady space, the truth becomes easier to trust. If something still feels solid without all the intensity, then it is probably real. If something becomes hollow the moment the emotion leaves, then it was likely never as deep as it seemed. That realization changes the way you move. You stop needing to force answers. You stop chasing feelings just to feel certain. You stop treating intensity like proof. Instead, you begin to trust what stays consistent. What lasts in silence usually has more truth in it than what only thrives in noise. Earlier phases often come with signs, pressure, and constant signals. Life keeps trying to get your attention. You feel redirected, interrupted, pushed to notice what you have been avoiding. But eventually, that volume lowers. And when it does, many people get uneasy. Without obvious signs, they think they have lost connection. Without emotional pressure, they think nothing is happening. But that silence does not mean abandonment. It means you are no longer being shaken awake. You already saw what you needed to see. When the noise stops, it is often because the lesson has already landed. Nothing more needs to pull at you. Nothing more needs to pull at you. Nothing more needs to prove itself. The shift has already happened. The understanding is already there. Now, the next step belongs to you. That is what makes this part so different. Before, you were being shown. Now, you are being asked to choose. There is less urgency now, less emotional force, fewer dramatic moments trying to push you in one direction or another. Not because nothing matters, but because you already know enough. The stage is quieter, because it is no longer about waking you up. It is about trusting what you already understand. And that kind of trust can feel heavy at first, because it takes away every excuse. You can no longer say you are waiting for a sign. You can no longer say you do not know what to do. The truth is already close enough to touch. Before, your movement may have come from reaction. Something happened, and you answered it. Something pushed you, and you moved. That can feel powerful in the moment. But this is a different kind of power. Now the movement comes from certainty. You move because something is clear. You choose because the direction makes sense. You act not because you are overwhelmed, but because you are ready. It is quieter, yes, but it is also stronger. It is more stable. It is not built on emotion that rises and falls. It is built on what you know. And that changes everything. Your actions start becoming simpler, but also more meaningful. You stop making decisions based on pressure. You stop reacting to every wave. You begin choosing from a calmer place. And that calm is not weakness. It is maturity. It is alignment. It is the moment your life stops being driven by intensity and starts being guided by truth. There is no need to rush when the confusion is already clearing. There is no need to force what is already opening. What matters now is not drama. What matters now is honesty. And before this message ends, I just want to leave you with this. Thank you for being here, for staying present, and for giving this moment your attention. In a world that pulls people in every direction, your willingness to pause and listen means more than you realize. If any part of this spoke to something real inside you, hold on to that. Let it be enough. Let it guide you gently instead of forcefully. You do not need to chase what is meant for you, and you do not need to prove yourself to what is already falling away. Just keep honoring what feels true, one step at a time. And truly, from the heart, thank you for sharing this space with me. Your time, your energy, and your presence are deeply appreciated.